Hello, everybody, and welcome. Merry Christmas to you all. And I have to announce that Mars is retrograde in Leo and it will be opposing Pluto. This is an explosive, quite toxic mix, and I'm not at all surprised to see what happened in Syria given these explosive energies, because I think it's going to be quite an intense end to this year, politically, in terms of intrigue, in terms of new conflicts brewing, particularly in Algeria, which is another Arab country which apparently there's agitation in order to perhaps overthrow that government as well. Plus, we see the bombs being dropped on Syria to destroy all their armaments, their air force, their navy. Things will intensify in Lebanon and Gaza, and next will be some sort of regime change in Iraq before potentially they move on to Iran. So I think this Mars in Leo, retrograde opposite Pluto, which will intensify between Christmas and New Year, is setting the stage for this pretty explosive year we're having in 2025. It's the year when all the planets are moving signs. Pluto's just moved. It is in Aquarius for good now. We'll have Neptune and Saturn moving into Aries. They've been going back and forward over the Aries point, which has been particularly explosive during history. We have Uranus, which will again be triggering that nefarious Pleiades section between the end of Taurus and the beginning of Gemini, and then heading into Gemini. And we have Jupiter, which is in Cancer, that'll in Gemini, heading into Cancer, and Mars, which is going to be retrograde for a very, very long time in Cancer. So explosive mix. Let's talk about Syria. I said in my predictions book, where I looked at all the horoscopes for different countries, that the civil war would begin again in Syria. I said 2023, 2004, 2023, 2024. And I did mention sometime further back in my vlogs that Bashar al-Assad would go around about this time. And it's happened. And we are seeing an enormous amount of hypocrisy. Now, the story with Israel is we must support Israel. They're fighting these terrorists, so we don't have to. However, the story is totally the opposite. When it comes to Bashar al-Assad, who is actually no threat and never was a threat to the UK, no one wakes up wondering what Bashar al-Assad is going to do to them, do they? But in his case, we must now support the most radical Salafist Wahhabist factions, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, people who behead, who garrote, who do the most atrocious and diabolical things. However, we must support them, and we must be really glad that President Assad is gone, but we must be really glad that the other brutal dictatorships like Saudi Arabia and Jordan and the UAE and all these other exploitative regimes, which are also dynastic, we've got to be really happy that they're continuing, because, they're a good thing. And we must be really glad that another country, Syria, will now be balkanized and will become like Libya, a failed state with different warring factions of various sects of fundamentalists fighting against each other. And guess what? Algeria is a secular state. They want to get rid of that. Syria was a secular state. With Bashar al-Assad, Christians were looked after. They were safe. He was an Alawite Muslim. He was more moderate. So we are now seeing a situation where Christians cannot celebrate Christmas. Christmas trees are being knocked down in neighborhoods where there are Christians. People are living in fear, wondering what's next. But of course, we must be very glad that Assad is gone. And do you notice something else? This is the end of the road for Lebanon and Palestine, because there are supply routes through Syria from Iran that would have been helping people in Lebanon, Hezbollah, Hamas, whatever, for their resistance. So you can now, it'll be easier for Israel to steamroll through the whole Palestine and Lebanon thing. And do notice that these rebels are no threat to Israel. Now, you'd think they're Muslims, they might support their brothers in Palestine, but no, they don't. They actually cooperate with Israel, and Israel are the recipients of benefits of this latest regime change operation. They're already moving from the Golan Heights, creating a buffer zone, which goes, I think, 25 miles into Syria or possibly more. They've already taken over one of the mountains where there's apparently a reservoir, so they've got access to most of Syria's water. So this is part of the Greater Israel Project, which involves an ambition to absorb Jordan, Syria, Lebanon, parts of Egypt, the Sinai Peninsula, and parts of Iraq into Israel, so they would have a border with Turkey, and that advances that ambition. So if you're wondering what this is all about, it is about the aims and ambitions of Israel. It's funded by the taxpayers in America and the United Kingdom, and ISIS work hand in glove with Israel. It's why during the whole decade of the Syrian war, you never heard about Israel being threatened by these Arab Islamic militants, who are apparently fundamentalists, but they never threaten Israel. And as Israel advanced past the Golan Heights to absorb this territory in the buffer zone, the rebels said, oh, we're not fighting them. Oh, we haven't got the manpower. We won't be fighting them. Now, what's very interesting is a lot of these rebels that were fighting against Assad came from assortment of countries, some you wouldn't expect. For example, they did come from Tunisia, from Libya, from Albania, from Ukraine, but they also were the Uyghurs that came all the way from China. And I find that very interesting, because we're often led to believe that the Uyghur Muslims in China are very oppressed by the Chinese government. So one does wonder how all these Uyghurs, and apparently there were thousands of them, according to George Galloway, a significant number. In fact, they were one of the biggest contingents fighting in this recent attack to remove Assad, were these Uyghurs. So I'm thinking, who recruited them? Did someone go over to that area of China and recruit them? Who trained them? Who paid for them? Who paid their wages, should I say? Who paid to fly them over to Syria or Kurdistan, where they undoubtedly were grouped together before they went into Syria? Kurds are another group. Turkmens are another group fighting there. So you've got to think all these mercenaries who formed this ragtag bunch of radicals who were fighting for regime change in Syria. Who funded them? Who trained them? Who pays their wages? Who funds their weapons? Who recruited them? And isn't it a bit odd that they were recruited from under the noses of the Chinese government? So one does wonder. Now, why did this fall so quickly? Well, it was a case of a very slow and painful death with a quick ending, because the sanctions against Syria, with much of their oil fields falling in the region with the Kurds' control and therefore the Americans' control, they were cut off from their oil supplies. Israel controlled the Golan Heights, which is a lot of their water, and they were ground down. Plus, I do believe Assad's wife has a very serious blood cancer, so it's possible that, you know, he was weakened by that as well. But I do feel a deal was made. I think Putin's been promised part of Ukraine if he gives up Syria or stops helping Syria. And I think between Putin, the Americans, the Brits, and maybe Assad, a deal was made. And that's why this all unfolded very, very quickly. Assad, of course, being weakened anyway by the fact that he has these family issues with his wife, and apparently couldn't afford even to pay the soldiers more than $5 a day because the sanctions have bitten so hard. So between economic and personal reasons and just a deal that was done with maybe the Russians prepared to let this one go, it fell very quickly. And the thing is, now it's fallen, it'll be that much easier for Lebanon, for there to be some sort of regime change in Lebanon. I think we'll see the end of any resistance in Gaza. They will try and install some other government in Iraq and then move on to Iran. I think Iran will fall like a pack of cards, and then they'll move on next year to put more pressure on Russia. What they most want is to control Russia. And they can, perhaps by weakening their allies, and eventually bring down, that is their strategy with Ukraine, is to grind Russia down. And if they can't do it through Ukraine, they'll do it through Georgia. You've seen they're trying to install new government there. They'll do it if they can get rid of the current Iran regime and install a pro-American regime in there. They can further grind down Russia through pressure from the south and through the Stans and maybe other places, Azerbaijan. And I think Putin's very stupid if he did a deal, because they never keep their word, these people. And and as I say, our taxpayers are all funding this, and it's of no benefit to the UK person at all. It's no benefit to the general health of the global family. So it's very disappointing to see that Bashar al-Assad wasn't able to hold on, and we are going to have a rocky ride in 2025, but there'll be much more from me on it, and hopefully I'll have another chance to make a video, quite a few, before Christmas.